Grant had $43 left the night. His landlord stuck that yellow notice to his door. Not even enough for a decent pair of shoes. All of it wadded up in a wallet he held shut with a rubber band, because the snap had broken 6 months ago, and he kept meaning to replace it. He stood in that hallway for a while. The fluorescent light above him made a ticking sound, the kind that gets louder the longer you stand under it. A dog was barking somewhere in the building, 3 or 4 floors up. Grant read the notice twice, folded it, and put it in his pocket like it was a receipt for something he'd bought on purpose. He was 31, which felt older than it should have. He'd never finished school, dropped out to work the warehouse, which seemed smart at 22. His mom lived in Tucson with a boyfriend Grant had met once. His brother owed him money from 3 years ago, and still hadn't called back about it. 6 months earlier, Grant had a job pulling orders in a distribution center. Nothing glamorous, but his checks cleared and his fridge had food in it. Then the company restructured. That's the word they used. One morning his badge didn't work at the front gate, and a security guard handed him a cardboard box and a pamphlet about unemployment benefits, like he was checking out of a hotel. Unemployment ran out after 12 weeks. The credit card bills kept coming anyway. Cards he'd barely touched became the only thing between him and skipping meals, until the minimum payments stacked up, and the math stopped working no matter how many times he punched it into his phone at 2 a.m. So there he was. $43, an eviction notice, and a duffel bag with 3 days' worth of clothes that smelled like the inside of his closet, because he'd stopped doing laundry 2 weeks ago to save quarters. He didn't know where he was going exactly. He had a bus pass in his back pocket that still had 6 rides on it, so he got on the number 7 and rode it until the stop name started sounding unfamiliar. Before he left, he'd shoved what he could into 2 garbage bags: clothes, his phone charger, a pair of work boots with the soles peeling at the toes. The rest he left. But the old TV from the bedroom and a box of tools from the closet, those he carried to a pawn shop 2 blocks over. The guy behind the counter gave him a $110 without looking up from his phone. The tools had been Grant's father's, or at least that's what his mom told him when she dropped them off years ago. He tried not to think about that part. He ended up at a storage facility off Highway 9, one of those orange-end places where the parking lot has weeds growing through the cracks, and the office smells like carpet cleaner. He'd seen a guy on Reddit talk about living in a storage unit. Illegal, sure. But when you're weighing that against sleeping on a bench at the bus station downtown, the one with the broken armrest and the overhead light that stays on all night, you start negotiating with yourself about what counts as a real problem. He rented a 10 by 15 unit, $89 a month, first month up front. The pawn shop money covered it, with $21 left over. He bought a foam mattress from a Goodwill for $15 of that. It smelled like someone else's basement, and by the second week it had a permanent dip in the middle where his hips sank in. He found 2 jobs: a morning shift stocking shelves at a grocery store, and an evening shift bussing tables at a diner called Rosie's. Between the 2, he pulled about $26 a month before taxes. His routine went like this: alarm at 4:30 a.m., peel himself off the foam mattress. His lower back had started making a clicking sound by the 3rd week, Walk 20 minutes to the grocery store because the first bus didn't run until 6. Stock canned goods and frozen pizzas until noon. Grab a $1 menu burger and eat it walking to Rosie's. Bus tables and mop floors until 10 p.m. Walk back to the storage unit in the dark, his feet so swollen that untying his boots felt like pulling off a bandage. He showered at a truck stop about a 10-minute walk away. $2 for 10 minutes of lukewarm water that cut out for the last 30 seconds while you were still covered in soap. He kept his toothbrush in a Ziploc bag and his deodorant in his coat pocket because the storage unit got humid enough to rust the cap. One night, 3 weeks into this, Grant was sitting in a laundromat waiting for his only set of work clothes to dry. His shirt had a grease stain from Rosie's that wouldn't come out no matter how much detergent he used, and he was picking at it with his thumbnail when he noticed someone had left a book on the plastic chair next to him. The cover was torn off. The spine cracked so badly the pages fanned out on their own. Some personal finance book, the kind with a bold title and a promise on the cover. Grant didn't even read the title. He picked it up because the dryer had 20 minutes left, and the laundromat TV was showing an infomercial for a blender. He read the whole thing that night, lying on his stomach in the storage unit, using his phone screen as a flashlight because the overhead bulb had burned out and he hadn't replaced it. Most of it was common sense wearing a suit. But one line caught him, and it caught him hard. The gap between what you earn and what you spend is the only number that determines your future. Grant set the book on the concrete floor and stared at the corrugated metal ceiling. He could hear the highway through the wall. He earned Thirsting's $100 a month. Storage unit, $89. Truck stop showers, maybe $60. Food, if you didn't buy anything stupid, $150. Phone, $35. That left over $1,000. And yet, somehow, by the end of each month, he had almost nothing. Coffees he bought because he was exhausted and the gas station was right there. Cigarettes. He'd quit twice already. Late-night Ubers because after a doubled shift his feet were so blistered he couldn't face the walk. Each one seemed small, and they were, individually. But they added up the way ants carry off a sandwich, one crumb at a time until there's nothing left. The next morning he bought a spiral notebook from the grocery store, the cheap kind, 99 cents, with the cardboard cover that bends if you look at it wrong. He started writing down every single thing he spent. Every dollar. Every vending machine Coke. Every pack of gum. It felt ridiculous. Like a grown man keeping a food diary. But 2 weeks in, the numbers told him something his gut already knew. He was bleeding almost $400 a month on things he couldn't even remember buying afterward. A streaming service. A gym membership from the warehouse days. Snacks. Stuff that vanished the moment he consumed it. So he spent an afternoon on the floor of his storage unit going through his phone, canceling things one by one. The streaming, the gym, the Spotify, all of it. It was not a good time. Some nights after that he sat in that unit with nothing to do. No TV, no streaming, no music because he'd killed the Spotify too. And the boredom was so physical it felt like pressure behind his eyes. But the notebook didn't lie. By the end of his second month tracking, He had $900 in a free checking account at a credit union. It wasn't going to change his life, but it was the first time since the eviction that he'd had anything between himself and zero. Around this time, he started noticing one of the regulars at Rosie's, an older woman named Diane. She came in every Thursday at 6 p.m., ordered the meatloaf special and a black coffee, and sat in the same corner booth reading an actual newspaper, the physical kind, with the big pages that you have to fold over. Ink on the fingertips. Grant had cleared her table plenty of times, and they'd exchanged the usual pleasantries. "How's the meatloaf tonight?" "Same as last week, honey." But one Thursday she looked up at him while he was refilling her water and said, "You look like a man who's carrying something heavy." He almost dropped the pitcher. He mumbled something about being tired, long shifts. She said, and looked at him over the rim of her cup for a beat too long. "Well, you don't look tired. You look like something else. I don't know the word for it." They started talking after that. Not every Thursday, but most. Diane had run a landscaping business for 30 years, started with a lawnmower she borrowed from a neighbor, and a stack of flyers she printed at the public library. Built it up to 8 employees and 2 trucks, before selling it when her husband got sick. She wasn't wealthy in any flashy way, but she owned her house, owed nobody anything, and told Grant she hadn't lost sleep over a bill since 2009. Grant asked her how. Genuinely. Because he couldn't see the line from where he was standing to where she'd gotten. "Same way I used to do a yard," she said, folding her newspaper. "When I started out, I'd show up and look at this big mess of a lawn, weeds up to my knees, and I'd think I can't do this. But then you just start in one corner. You mow that patch, then the next one. You don't think about the whole yard. You just do the patch you're standing on." Grant didn't say anything. He wiped down the table next to hers, even though it was already clean, and then wiped it again. He started looking things up on his cracked phone during breaks, sitting on a milk crate in the back of the grocery store, scrolling through YouTube videos about money. He learned about compound interest, about how money can generate more of itself if you leave it alone long enough, and the concept hit him less like a revelation, and more like something he'd always vaguely suspected but never had the language for. He learned about index funds, big baskets of stocks you could buy into for cheap, no expertise required. He started sorting everything in his head into 2 piles. Stuff that cost him money every month, and stuff that maybe, if he left it alone long enough, could make some. The storage unit was the first kind. The $50 he'd scraped together for a brokerage account, he hoped that was the second. He opened the account on a Tuesday, sitting in the laundromat again because it had free Wi-Fi. Bought a share of a broad market index fund, and then checked the app approximately 40 times in the next 3 days. It went down $1.12. Grant's thumb hovered over the sell button for a solid minute. Then he closed the app and shoved the phone in his pocket. A few weeks later, he made a mistake that cost him. Stocker at the grocery store, a guy named Pete who always had a tip about something, told him about a biotech penny stock, said his cousin's friend made $4,000 off it in a week. Grant put $200 in. The stock dropped 60% in 10 days. $120. Gone. That was groceries. That was 60 showers at the truck stop. He felt it in his stomach, literally, like he'd swallowed something that wasn't going to come back up. He told Diane about it the next Thursday. She was stirring her coffee, not looking at him. "Good," she said. "Good. You paid $120 for that lesson. I've seen people pay 100 times that for the same one." She set the spoon down. "Yeah, don't. Just don't do that again. I watched a guy lose his truck that way, chasing the hot thing. Just buy the boring one, the big index or whatever they call it, and leave it alone. That's what my accountant told me 20 years ago, and it was the only useful thing he ever said." Her hand shook slightly when she lifted the cup. Grant noticed. She caught him noticing and waved it off. "Old wiring," she said. "Everything starts rattling after 70. Grant went back to the index fund. 50 a month. Pulled out of his checking account automatically so he wouldn't talk himself out of it. Then 75 when he started picking up extra shifts. The weeks bled into each other. Grocery store, Rosie's, storage unit, repeat, and then it was February somehow, and then almost spring. Marcus, one of the other bussers at Rosie's, started giving him a hard time. About the notebook, about the packed lunches, about never coming out on Fridays anymore. "What are you doing, man?" Marcus said one afternoon, loud enough for the whole break room. "Playing Wall Street. You bus tables, bro. You're not getting rich off pocket change." The other guys laughed. Grant felt heat in his face. He said something like, "Yeah, probably not," and left the room. But it stuck. It stuck the way things stick when you're already not sure you're doing the right thing. On the worst days, he'd hear Marcus's voice in his head, "You bust tables, bro," and it sat there like a stone he couldn't cough up. The worst day came 8 months in. His car, a 2004 Civic he'd bought for $2,800, the first real thing he'd purchased with saved money, threw a rod. The mechanic quoted him $400. Grant had $100 in his emergency fund, which he'd built up specifically for moments like this. Except when the moment actually arrived, it didn't feel planned for at all. It felt like being hit from behind. He sat in the repair shop parking lot with his forehead on the steering wheel. For a while he just breathed, slow and ragged, his breath fogging the glass. Then he cried, mouth open, nose running, the whole thing. He didn't bother wiping any of it, because there was nobody around to see. After a while, 10 minutes, maybe 20, he pulled out his phone and opened the brokerage app. He didn't know why. Maybe to look at something that wasn't the parking lot. The number on the screen said he was up about $11. It was a joke, really. $11 wouldn't cover his phone bill. But he stared at it, and something about it was different from any other money he'd ever had. Because he hadn't earned those $11. He hadn't bussed a table for them, or stocked a shelf, or mopped a floor. They'd appeared on their own, while he was sleeping or working or crying in a parking lot. His money had done something without him. He wiped his face with his sleeve, paid the mechanic, and watched his emergency fund drop to almost nothing. He didn't touch the brokerage account. About a year in, Grant noticed something during his grocery shifts. The storefronts and parking lots around the area were disgusting. Gum ground into concrete, oil stains, algae creeping up the walls. Nobody cleaned them. He'd pressure washed his uncle's driveway as a teenager with a garden hose attachment. It wasn't complicated work. He found a used commercial pressure washer on Craigslist for $450. It was dented. The nozzle was stripped, and the previous owner had spray-painted "Works Fine" on the side in white letters, which wasn't exactly confidence-inspiring. But it ran. Grant bought a replacement nozzle for $12 at a hardware store and printed flyers at the library, same way Diane had done 30 years earlier. Stuck them on bulletin boards at laundromats, grocery stores, gas stations. A guy in Hilliard wanted his driveway done, $75. Took him an hour and a half because he didn't have the technique down yet and had to redo one section twice. But that was almost as much as a full grocery shift, and when he finished, the homeowner said, "You do commercial lots too." Within 2 months, he had enough weekend work to quit the grocery store. Within 4 months, he'd saved $1,200 from the pressure washing alone. One Thursday, Grant walked into Rosie's, and Diane's booth was empty. The owner said she'd called in, first time anyone could remember. She came back the following week, but something was off. She moved slower getting into the booth, bracing herself on the table edge with both hands. She'd lost weight in her face. Her newspaper's data sat folded in front of her for a long time before she picked it up. Grant didn't say anything about it, but he started refilling her coffee before she had to wave him over. 2 years after that eviction notice, Grant's life had changed in ways that were hard to see from the outside, but impossible to miss from the inside. He had a cleaning business, 3 guys working for him part-time, a used van with a magnetic logo on the door that peeled up at the corners when it rained. He'd moved out of the storage unit after 7 months, first into a shared apartment with a guy who worked nights, which meant they barely crossed paths, and then into a studio. Nothing special, but it had a stove that worked, and a front door that locked, and sheets he'd picked out himself at Target. He'd met Brooke at a client's barbecue. She did dispatch for a plumbing company, had a laugh you could hear from across a yard, and didn't ask too many questions about his past, which he appreciated more than he told her. His brokerage account had $14,000 in it. He added to it every month, automatically, same way he'd been doing. The index fund did what index funds do, grew slowly, dropped sometimes, grew back. He checked it on Sundays. It bored him. That seemed right. He'd paid off his credit cards. The last one, $2,200, took 8 months of throwing every spare dollar at it. The day the balance hit zero, he didn't celebrate. He sat at the kitchen table in his studio and breathed out. Just sat there and breathed for maybe 5 minutes without looking at anything. One afternoon, Grant drove past Rosie's on the way to a job in Westerville and saw Marcus through the window, wiping down a table. Same apron. Grant thought about stopping, saying hello, But the van was double parked and he had a 2 o'clock, so he kept going. Then one Thursday, Grant still went to Rosie's most weeks, partly out of habit, partly because the meatloaf was genuinely good. Diane's booth was empty. No newspaper on the table. The ketchup bottles were pushed to the center, the way they look when nobody's sat there all day. The owner told him, quietly, in her sleep, over the weekend. Her daughter had called that morning. Grant sat in the booth. He didn't order anything. The meatloaf special was on the board behind the counter. He sat there until his coffee went cold, which didn't take long because Rosie's always served it lukewarm anyway. A week later, Diane's daughter, a woman Grant had never met, dropped off a letter at the diner. It was in a plain white envelope addressed to the young man with the notebook. Inside, in handwriting that leaned to the right and trembled at the ends of words, Grant, I don't know if I ever told you this, but watching you come in here every week and work so hard reminded me of when I was starting out. I was scared all the time back then too. You're going to be fine. Just keep showing up and doing the next thing. That's all I ever did. Diane. Grant folded the letter and slid it into the notebook, the same 99-cent notebook he'd been using for 2 years. The pages were soft at the edges now, the cover warped from being shoved in and out of his back pocket. He was almost out of pages. 5 years after that eviction notice, Grant drove past the storage facility on Highway 9, on his way to pick up his daughter from Brooke's mother's place. Unit 37B had a different padlock on it. He didn't slow down. That evening he sat in his apartment, the real one, with the lease, and the mailbox, and the welcome mat his daughter had picked out, the one with the cartoon frog on it that she thought was hilarious, and read to her. She was too. She had Brooke's laugh. She didn't know about the storage unit, or the truck stop showers, or the nights Grant sat in a parking lot with his face in his hands. She just knew he was there, and that he turned the pages slowly, and that when she pointed at the pictures, he told her what the animals were called. Brooke was on the couch behind them, half watching something on her phone, half watching them. On the bookshelf, the one Grant had assembled himself from a flat pack, slightly crooked because he'd stripped one of the screws, sat a framed photo next to the torn paperback from the laundromat. An older woman in a diner booth, holding a newspaper, smiling at whoever was behind the camera.